bisexual, pansexual, asexual, gender fluid, queer, the terminology used to define our sexuality and gender identities has greatly expanded in recent years, at least in the public eye. These terms have existed much longer clinically or in certain circles, but these concepts and feelings are nothing new. Since the dawn of man, there have been those who don't quite adhere to societal definition of love. But love is love. So, in honor of Pride Month, we're going to look at 3 historic badasses who happen to also be queer icons. I mean, who am I kidding? These are stories I've wanted to do anyway. But June is a great reason to do them. So why not? Welcome to History, Mystery, and the Unexplained, the show where we look at everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. And be sure to give us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Let's begin with legendary Julie d'Albany, also known as Mademoiselle Maupin. She was a 17th century bisexual opera singer who dueled men, stole hearts, set convents on fire, and lived more boldly than most action heroes. In short, she was history's most flamboyant badass. Like many historic legends, her story is filled with exaggeration and sensationalism. But this is the story that most people agree upon. Julie was born in 1673 to Gaston d'Albany, who was the secretary to Louis de Lorraine, Guy's Count d'Albany, a powerful French nobleman. Think secretary of the state, advisor position, not, the person taking dictation. Gaston was in charge of training the court pages, and as such, he trained his daughter right alongside them. This offered her a unique upbringing where she was taught reading and arithmetic as well as horseback riding and fencing, like the young men of the time. She also dressed as a boy in a very Arya Stark fashion, defied gender norms. By 12, she was regularly winning fencing matches against men, and by 14, she became the Count's mistress. Given her age, it might be more appropriate to say she was taken advantage of by her father's boss. Around this time, her father also arranged to have her wed to Jean de Maupin. They were married more in name only. Her husband was promptly sent to the south of France, and she stayed with the Count. At least for the time being. She fell for a fencing master named Serene, and Serene killed a man in a duel and became wanted by the law. As such, the two took to the road. Well, on the lam, they didn't exactly lay low. They performed fencing expositions at fairs and in taverns and sang for the crowds. It's noted by most historians that she still typically dressed as a man at this time. This isn't because she was in disguise. This is just because this is how she was comfortable. She was being herself. While traveling, she fell in love with a young woman. Now, no versions of this tale name the girl. In fact, it's more than likely that she's some composite character used to highlight Julie's chaotic, rebellious nature. But exaggerated, romanticized, or not, this is how the legend goes. The young woman was the daughter of a wealthy nobleman. And upon hearing that his daughter's relations with this cross-dressing, traveling performer, her parents were outraged and had their daughter sent to a convent. Not to let anyone stand in her way, Julie took vows and joined the convent herself. Once there, she took the body of a deceased nun. Again, not recorded where exactly the body came from. Presumably, the convent had a morgue, not just the dead nun's room. Well, a morgue would be a dead nun's room. Anyway, it's assumed that there was a nun waiting for burial and she took it. But she hid the body in her lover's room, set the convent ablaze, and the two took off into the night. Like so many of her other relationships, it burned quickly. They were done in 3 months. The girl returned to her parents, and Julie d'Albany stayed on the lam. She was charged with kidnapping person and desecration of a corpse and convicted in absentia. Her sentence, death by fire. She was to be burned at the stake. But King Louis XIV, at the urging of Count d'Albany, had her pardoned. In fact, he found the whole thing hysterical. So what's a girl to do with her newfound freedom? She joined the opera, and she excelled at it. She was a powerful mezzo-soprano, and her stage presence made her both a star and a scandal. She was loved both on and off the stage and was known for defending the honor of herself and her various lovers. If someone heckled her or someone she loved, she would hop off that stage, draw her sword, and fight them right then and there. It reminds me of this girl I used to hang with back in the day. She was this 5'2" little Italian firecracker. We were doing karaoke, and she was on the stage, and some girl in the audience started talking shit. She hopped up, jacked the girl's boyfriend in the face, and went right back to singing. Even the bouncers were confused and didn't know what to do. They let her finish the song and then yeeted us out. But back to our Queen Julie. There is one legend that she was attending a ball in the late 1690s when she got a little too cozy with a woman on the dance floor. Several men started clutching their proverbial pearls because true men kissing was so untoward in front of the nobles. 3 men challenged her to a duel. She fought them and won, then returned to the party, blood-stained clothes, grabbed the girl, gave her a kiss and a twirl, and went right back to dancing. Julie d'Albany was unapologetically and quite openly bisexual at a time when such disregard for authority could be seen as a death sentence. Yes, she was pardoned by the king for her transgressions at the convent. But the king was not the only authority. It was the church that condemned her then. Her actions at the ball were a different story. Her invite came from Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, the king's own brother. Honor dueling was illegal, and once again, she became wanted. She fled to Germany this time and hid out and spent her time with some prince. Hi. She turned out to be way too much for him to handle, and he sent her back to France. But it was long enough for tensions to die down. And upon returning to France, she finally settled down and found her one true, Madame la Marquise de Florissac. During a performance, de Florissac became ill, and within 2 days she passed. When she died, Julie was devastated. She left the opera, returned again to the convent, this time in mourning, and within 2 years passed away herself at the young age of just 33. Julie d'Albany, Mademoiselle Maupin, or simply La Maupin. Whatever you want to call her, she lived her life as a real-world bard with charisma so high she didn't even need to roll. And for someone who had lived so loudly, so defiantly, strangely poetic that she ended her life quietly in mourning for the woman that she loved. At a time when so many stories are being suppressed, even modern ones, it is important to remember those that paved the way. It's no wonder Chapel Roan paid homage to this queer icon at the AMAs in 2024. Dr. James Berry was very specific about what should happen to his body upon his death. He wanted to be buried immediately, in the clothes he died in, and explicitly requested no examination or preparation be made. Those wishes were not respected. On July 25th, 1865, his housemaid, Sophia Bishop, redressed his body for burial, and in doing so discovered what she believed to be a secret, that Dr. Berry had been born biologically female. Berry was born in Cork, Ireland in 1789 and given the name Margaret Ann Bulkley. In his teens, he took the name James Berry and lived the rest of his life as a man. Sophia Bishop took her discovery to Berry's physician, Staff Sergeant Major D.R. McKinnon, demanding payment for her silence. When he refused, she went to the press. And what did McKinnon say when asked about all this? He answered with probably the best part of this story. Whether Dr. Berry was male, female, hermaphrodite, I do not know, nor had I any purpose in making that discovery. I could positively swear to the identity of the body as being the person whom I had been acquainted with as Inspector General of Hospitals for a period of 8 or 9 years. In other words, he was a person, a colleague, a brilliant surgeon, someone who lived and worked for decades as a man and earned the respect of those around him. Not because of his body, but because of his work. So why does this matter? Why did it matter then? Why does it matter now? Dr. Berry never claimed the spotlight as a trans icon. He has to be left alone. He lived more than 50 years as a man and wanted to be remembered for what he accomplished, not for the circumstances of his birth. But the headlines haven't honored that. So many books and articles tell the story with titles like Women Who Posed as Men, or Dr. James Berry, a woman ahead of her time. They frame him as this rebellious heroine, a kind of inverse Mrs. Doubtfire, giving the finger to the patriarchy. And yeah, I'm all for flipping off the patriarchy, but rewriting Berry's story to fit some more palatable narrative doesn't do him or people like him then or now any justice. Dr. James Berry wasn't pretending to be a man, he was one. And he wanted to be remembered for his mind, his skill, and his service. Not for what was or wasn't between his legs. Okay, rant over. Let's move on. Now, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, career options for women were limited at best. You could be a housewife, a midwife, a domestic servant, or a sex worker. If you were lucky, you could be a teacher. Can I be a lawyer? No, get in the box, you little bitty. But Berry dreamed bigger. He wanted to be a doctor, and amazingly, a whole cast of people helped make that dream possible. Or so it's speculated. Berry's uncle, also named James Berry, was a renowned artist. It's believed that with the help of his influential friends, Dr. Edward Fryer and Venezuelan revolutionary general Francisco de Miranda, they helped get young James into the top medical school of the time, the University of Edinburgh. Now, Berry was about 5 feet tall, had delicate features, and a high-pitched voice. But he was also a spicy jalapeno. His classmates assumed that he was a prepubescent boy, a young prodigy excelling at his work. They believed that this so strongly that the university senate tried to stop him from taking his final exams. But he graduated in 1812 and a year later was certified by the Royal College of Surgeons of England. Soon after, Berry joined the British Army as a hospital assistant. He quickly rose to assistant surgeon and was sent to Cape Town, South Africa, where he served for 12 years. Well, there he revolutionized public health, improving sanitation and insisting that all patients be treated equally, regardless of race, class, or affliction. But his time in Cape Town wasn't all medical miracles. Scandal followed him, especially because of his close relationship to Lord Charles Somerset, the colony's general. Barry dined frequently at Somerset's estate and was seen coming and going at all hours. Whispers started, then rumors, and then a full-blown scandal. Pamphlets were circulated accusing the two men of a sexual relationship. At that time, homosexuality wasn't just taboo, it was a capital offense. Careers could be ruined, lives could be lost, and an informal investigation was launched. Likely as a political maneuver against Somerset, but still, no charges were filed, but the damage was done. Somerset was quietly reassigned. Dr. James Barry would go on to have a remarkable military career, rising in the ranks to Inspector General of Hospitals, the equivalent to a Brigadier General. That made him the highest ranking medical officer in the British Army. He traveled throughout the empire from Jamaica to St. Helena to Malta to Crimea, where he fought tirelessly to improve sanitation, public health, and humane treatment of soldiers and prisoners alike. He performed the first successful cesarean section where both the mother and child survived. He advocated for better nutrition, clean water, and dignity in healthcare, often butting heads with colonial authorities to do it. This man didn't just shake tables, he flipped them over. But not everyone loved him. When Barry crossed paths with Florence Nightingale during the Crimean War, she called him the most disagreeable man I ever met. Apparently, Barry scolded her in public. Nightingale respected his medical skill, but let's just say that they didn't exchange Christmas cards. Barry eventually retired due to health problems and died in 1865. And that takes it back to where we started. When Sophia found his body and declared publicly that he was a woman, it set off a storm of speculation. Women could not be in the military, could not be doctors, and certainly couldn't be top brass in both fields. In part, due to all the high acclaim he achieved, the military wanted the story silenced. To this day, there is debate over how to categorize Barry's identity. Was he a trans man, a non-binary person living in disguise, a woman simply surviving in the sexist world? The only thing we know for sure is that James Barry lived his truth on his terms in a world that gave him every reason not to. In a time when simply existing outside the norm could cost you your life, Barry not only survived, he thrived, healed, and fought for those with no voices. Whether you see him as a medical pioneer or a queer icon, or a rebel in a powdered wig, his story reminds us that history is full of people who broke the rules just to be themselves. And sometimes those rule breakers are the ones who save lives. For our last story, let's fast forward to Berlin. It's the early 1900s. Champagne flows, jazz pulses through the clubs, and for a brief moment, Germany is queer as hell. Oh, those lederhosen are so gay. I know, right? Thank you. Enter Magnus Hirschfeld. Hello. He was a doctor, a sexologist, and a proud gay Jewish man who looked at the world and said, "Nein! You all got it wrong." He wasn't just ahead of his time, he was running laps around it. In 1919, Hirschfeld founded the Institute for Sexualwissenschaft, the Institute for Sexual Science. It was the first of its kind, part research lab, part clinic, part safe haven for queer and trans people. They offered therapy, STI testing, contraceptive access, even early gender affirming care. And this wasn't some underground operation. They had books, lectures, thousands of people came through their doors. This place was revolutionary. It was radical. And it was real science, too. Hirschfeld coined the term transvestite, which back then was used neutrally. And he was one of the first to study gender on a spectrum, not a binary. He believed that sexuality and gender were natural, diverse, and nothing to be ashamed of. His motto was through science to justice. But of course, Nazis hate joy. When Hitler rose to power, one of the first things his stormtroopers did, literally May 6, 1933, was raid Hirschfeld's institute. They destroyed it, burned over 20,000 books and research files, and paraded the destruction through the streets. That infamous footage you've seen of Nazis burning books, yeah, at the Queer Science. That was our history. Hirschfeld was out of the country when it happened, and he died in exile 2 years later, heartbroken. But his legacy still burns bright. Julie d'Albany, Dr. James Barry, Magnus Hirschfeld. 3 people from 3 different centuries with one thing in common. They dared to exist beyond the limits society placed on them. Julie fought with a sword in one hand and scandal in the other. Barry healed the sick while hiding in plain sight, and Hirschfeld tried to save the world with science before it was silenced. These stories remind us that queer history isn't just rainbow flags and parades. It's rebellion, survival, and brilliance that refused to be erased. So whether you're out and proud or still figuring things out, you come from a long line of badasses. Happy Pride. That's it for today, folks. Till next time, I'm Christopher Granowitz. This is History, Mystery, and the Unexplained. And thanks for listening.